I go back and I remember when COVID first started here in the U.S. and Microsoft was pouring a lot of money, and Apple and all these big think tanks are spending money. They're the ones that impress me the most because those are the people that understand big data. Mm-hmm. And if they are getting involved in this and we're using supercomputers, we are getting technology involved in a traditional healthcare world. We're cross-pollinizing, and bigger and better ideas are going to come out of that.
What will you do when your money works for you? Welcome to the Tech Girl Financial Podcast with your hosts, Victor and Kim Gaxiola. From the home office in California, here is Victor and Kim.
I think it'll come as no surprise that the year 2020 will be remembered as the year of the coronavirus and the COVID-19 and the fact that we were staying home. But what it won't likely be remembered for is the amount of innovation and exciting development that's taking place in this country and around the world.
So today we want to talk about the silence. The things that are not being talked about, but are so pivotal to how we grow in the next 10 years.
Absolutely. The thing is that behind the scenes, and this is something that you'll often see in conversations that are taking place, is it's unquestionable the amount of resources and the amount of people and the amount of intelligence that's being thrown at trying to solve for COVID-19 and trying to find either a vaccine or ways to address this to reduce the time that people might be spending in the hospital for those that get it, or preventative measures so that people don't get it and they vaccinate against it. And, with that much energy being focused on a specific area, there will be byproducts of other developments that come about. And so today's podcast, what we wanted to do is, as we discussed in the introduction to the fourth season of the Tech Girl Financial Podcast, was looking at the world of innovation. And so today we wanted to talk about some of the big ideas and things to be excited about as far as the silver linings that are taking place, despite the fact that we're in a shutdown and across the world and people have been, staying at home.
Right. And I want to bring it up because it's really exciting to know no matter what happens and who wins in the elections of 2020, that you cannot stop people like Elon Musk from innovating and from helping our economy grow. Because truly it's the disruptive innovation that people like him are doing that are going to provide the growth in GDP for the next 10, 20 years and beyond.
Well, and despite the fact that a lot of the things that are focusing on COVID-19 might be funded through some sort of, governmental bodies and such, the fact is that most of this is being driven by private enterprise.
Right.
Corporations, publicly traded companies, or organizations that are basically capitalistic. They're not being driven because of federal programs.
Right. And so we also have to thank COVID-19. I know nobody wants to say anything great about COVID-19, but I truly do believe that this, because it's impacted even sectors of the economy that don't get much talk about growth, like education and traditional ways of studying, that COVID has forced them to change their ways so dramatically that I think that we're going to be left with change in every facet of our lives. And it has to do a lot with, how do we change things? How do we still educate our kids in the best way we can when teachers can't see them every day in the classroom? And so I think actually computers have a lot to do with that.
Well, computers and need, and define need. And like they say, that necessity is the mother of invention and innovation. And so we find ourselves at a global scale needing solutions. But there are solutions that are being presented in so many different areas and so many different facets. And that's really what we want to talk about today, is some of the big ideas so that we can get excited and feel a sense of optimism and enthusiasm for what is being developed, which will affect us. We're not talking about things that are, 10, 20, 30 years down the road. We're talking about things that are happening already and things that will make a massive impact on how we live and how we spend over the course of the next 10 to 20 years.
Right. And you think about back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, when the internet finally arrived and how that rapidly changed the way we do business. It changed the way we buy things. It did so much to our world. And at a rapid pace. Mm-hmm. And so you think, how could anything change the way we're living today? Because if you were around in the 1990s, we were doing things totally different than we were doing them now. Mm-hmm. But that's going to be disrupted again.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And this has happened historically. I mean, you can look back at the biggest innovations that have changed history. And you stretch it back to like the 1400s, the Gutenberg press. And all of a sudden you can do mass communications. You fast forward, you've got radio and then television and then the internet. And then, even fast forward from the internet to smartphones, the iPhone, and just the fact that mobile technology has now created new industries. And so that accelerated pace, of these technologies that are game changers are happening much, much faster. And so we are going to talk about some game-changing innovation today. Why don't we do this? I'll start with the first 5. I'll introduce them. We'll talk a little about each one, and then you can introduce the remaining 5.
Okay.
Sounds good? So the first one is one we're probably most familiar with, even though you don't know you may be familiar with, and that is the idea of deep learning or artificial intelligence. And so deep learning and artificial intelligence is really talking about things like conversational computers. What does that sound like? Sounds like Alexa. It sounds like OK Google, right?
Siri,
Spotify, Pandora. Self-driving cars also falls under the camp of. Did our Alexa just shut on? Does she?
It's
do
off.
Do you need something, Alexa? Okay, she was talking to us. So she's part of the podcast as well. And so when it comes to, deep learning and artificial intelligence, it's things like your Netflix, when you sign on, recommending specific shows based on your viewing profile.
I still go back to our trip to Europe last year when Noah decided he could have a conversation with anybody through his cell phone and, asked for, changed the menu from Italian to English just by turning on his cell phone. Or when we were in Greece, we didn't know how to speak to anybody. And you said, hey, Google, how do you say, where's the nearest bathroom? Mm-hmm. And it came up with what you needed to say.
Right. So we were using Google Translate. Mm-hmm. And so the time that I remember this the most is when we were in Greece and we wanted to catch a bus. And so we just basically said, what is the word for bus station? And it spelled it out on my phone in Greek. And we were able to point that to people. Well, now, of course, most of the people that we were walking around, they spoke English. But I think they appreciate the fact that we're making an attempt to, if nothing else, to speak in their language or to show them that that's what we were looking for. And so we got to where we needed to be thanks to new technology. It would probably be a little more difficult or more heavy because you'd have to carry a huge guidebook or something with you. So it was nice to have that. But like I say, the deep learning and the AI that's happening, it's happening behind the scenes. We're probably most familiar with it because of our interaction. So, for example, with Spotify, if I listen to a certain number of artists, it's using its deep learning and algorithms to determine what other types of genre music might be good. They actually have playlists that are specifically customized to your taste, and with the introduction of new artists. And honestly, they're amazing because I have listened to some new artists. So even though a lot of the music that I enjoy might be 20 to 30 years old, because of those listening habits, Spotify is creating certain playlists of saying, here's some new music that you may like based on your listening habits.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that because, imagine who could have known that back in the day when we used to go to like Tower Records and you walked in, you know what you like, and you would just buy what you like. There was nobody there unless you talked to someone and say, hey, these are the artists that I like. You would actually have to talk to someone. But they wouldn't know your history of listening habits unless you sat there and told them about it.
Right. And it's really interesting when you say that because when you look at the business side and the revenue generated, the music industry was at a loss when they could no longer sell records anymore, and record sales, CD sales, and all that went down like a cliff, right? And then there was a transition period where the music industry really didn't know how to make money. And then you saw people were downloading digital files with the iPods and those kind of connections. And then all of a sudden entered Spotify and all these streaming platforms. And interestingly, people weren't downloading that much music. And so the music industry was still hurting. And then all of a sudden when streaming came about, we are now almost up to the same amount of revenue generated from streaming that they used to produce from record sales. And so, things always change. There can be growing pains and whatnot. Another area that is really cool with deep learning is, I remember my son, Noah, when he was going to one of his elementary schools, he had a program that would ask him math problems. And, all those kids in that class were learning at different levels, had different strengths. And as the math program asked more and more questions, problems to the kids, it would find out their weaknesses and then give them more problems in those areas that they needed more work on so that they could get stronger in every area. And wow, if a teacher had to do that kind of individualized, focused learning plan for each student, that would take an enormous amount of time.
Absolutely.
And so we see, this deep learning coming into all facets of our lives.
Like I said, so it's happening already. This is not a technology that we're waiting or something out in the, from a visionary standpoint. What is likely to happen is it'll be much more prevalent in our day-to-day lives and happening behind the scenes, making things easier. So imagine, the application that we're talking mostly about entertainment or music, but AI deep learning also can apply to self-driving cars and vehicles that are just kind of moving around.
Drones, delivery.
All kinds of things. So we will continue. So staying on that theme of artificial intelligence, we already touched on the second big area and facets for big ideas is streaming media. And so again, streaming media is really the combination of both distribution and content. And so traditionally, for those of us that still remember going into record stores or still remember, that there was record labels to begin with, and I guess I'm just thinking a lot about vinyl, but even in the movie side, the movie production, there was studios that would produce movies, and then those movies would be shown on television or they'd be distributed through multi-theaters and multiplexes. And so content was created by one group, distribution was through a different group, and now there's this blending of the two.
Right.
Things like Netflix, which is not only a massive distributor of content, but they're now a creator of content, so they're doing both. Spotify, Amazon, Hulu, YouTube, all of these different content plus distribution networks that exist today.
Right. And so we are doing, for the first time, our family will be watching Mulan tonight. As you know, it was not able to come out this summer when it was supposed to in the movie theaters because of COVID. And so tonight we have the opportunity to buy it and stream it online. And the whole family gets to watch it together. Yep. In the comfort of our own homes. I'm not big on movie theaters that much. I don't always go with you to the movie theaters. So this, to me, makes me happy.
Well, the interesting model about this is going through streaming media. So Disney Plus does require a subscription service, which we have, but they have actually created this entire premium service that'll allow you to purchase the film and then own the film, although almost as if it was part of your library. But instead of it being like a physical DVD, it's actually, in your Disney Plus, library, which we can build on and going forward. And provided that we continue being Disney Plus subscribers, we'll be able to keep that movie for repeated viewings.
And so when you think about all of these opportunities that we're doing, there's unfortunate kind of losers in the situation. As we think of a traditional movie house, we may not have as many of those in the future, and they may miss out because they're a distributor as opposed to being a content provider who happens to be able to distribute it as well through streaming. But in the end, that brings the cost down to the end user. And we always end up spending that money somewhere else, right?
That's right. To say nothing of the fact that the distribution networks that exist like this, that are very widespread, may create new audiences or expanded audience that maybe wouldn't have experienced the film because you've made the you've made it a frictionless opportunity. And what I mean by that is you look at movies like The Irishman, which was also on Netflix. Netflix produced, Netflix distribution. More people probably saw that movie because it was on Netflix as a subscriber than would have gone to the movie theater to watch it and experience it there. And that could very well happen with Mulan as well, where more people will see it because they can see it from the comfort of their home at one price than they would have gone to the theater and paid not just that, but more. So on the plus side, the viewership might be bigger. On the negative side, that means that theaters like AMC or Cinelex isn't getting that concession revenue that they'd be used to getting. And
then on the plus side again is the hardware, because those, when you go into those model homes and they show you there's a theater room, and you're probably looking at it going, oh, I'm sold. I want to buy this house, right? But that probably will become more prevalent in more houses. So hardware sales, what kind of business does that generate?
Right.
And studio sound and the big screens and all of that comes with it.
And you already touched on this, but even with the music streaming services, so thinking about music, how it did revive the industry, and the fact that it's providing a much richer catalog of music for people to choose from. And so there's that discovery of artists in the past, but it's also almost democratized the distribution network so that if you're a new artist and you have access to a platform, so Spotify, and this podcast is on Spotify, so you can access our podcast on Spotify equally as you can the Joe Rogan podcast or any other podcast that's on Spotify. So there's that democratization of distribution.
Right.
And yes, we do not, unfortunately, Kim, have the same number of downloads or listeners to our podcast than, let's say, Joe Rogan does. Maybe it's a fraction of that, but the fact is we're on the same platform. So
I feel special.
You feel special. Good.
Yeah, well, we have a lot to cover, so...
Yes, let's continue. So the third area of focus and excitement is electric vehicles, or EVs. So you've probably seen these. I'm seeing more and more, at least in our community, where you can charge your Tesla, plug it in, and of course the incentives around, people who do drive electric vehicles and being able to, park, charge up, and move around. And before it was a bigger deal, I think that you could use the carpool lane. But because of COVID, not that many people are on the road like they used to be. So I don't know that that's as much of an advantage. But the one area that is really, that when it comes to electric vehicles, which is pretty exciting, is the fact that the cost associated, and this is the case for many of these technologies, that the cost associated with the production of these vehicles and the operation and the owning continues to go down.
So we're almost, I think, in the next couple years going to be at a tipping point, what I've seen from some of the research the analysts have been doing, where there'll be the cost of an EV car versus the cost of a car that takes regular fuel will be about the same. And so then it's going to be a preference.
Right. And I know that, it's kind of mixed, whether people think from an environmental standpoint, the savings of not using fossil fuels and what it might be doing to the environment. But then again, you've got the batteries. And what do you do about the disposal of batteries? So that'll probably continue to be an area of focus. But the reality is, I think that, when people used to envision the 2000s, of course, I used to envision flying cars. And that's still coming, but not quite yet.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that. But as far as electric vehicles are concerned, it looks like the costs are going down. So there are opportunities there as well.
Right. And I think the main thing, too, is just how do you recharge that battery? So currently, I think pretty standard operation is about 250 miles, which is okay. I always equate it to, do I need to fill up my gas tank when I drive from here, from Northern California, Morgan Hill to Los Angeles? If I can make it all the way there, that's a good tank of gas, because that's more like 300, 350, depending on where you're going. But the other question is, how long do you have to sit to recharge? And so until they have that where it takes the same amount of time as it does to pump my gas, I don't know if I'm there yet.
Yeah, the fast charging. And we keep talking about, the vehicles as far as our own commercial use, like for us. Mm-hmm. But they're also for delivery trucks, things that like fleets. So I know like Amazon, for example, has an electric vehicle fleet in San Diego and across the country. So you can see the commercial application of it at much larger level. And perhaps, if they're saving so much and if the cost is coming down and there is a savings involved, and with the amount of deliveries they're doing, perhaps, there is some advantages of moving towards electric vehicles.
Right.
But it still may be a little while before there's that tipping point where most of the cars out there are electrical. What I tend to see is a lot more of the hybrid. Mm-hmm. A little bit of electrical and also gas, so a little bit of both.
Well, and I think we'll be in that world for probably quite a while, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. I think that the more we diversify how we get our energy, the better off we are. And you can think back in the day when we were totally reliant on the Middle East, and now we're not reliant on the Middle East, and we have not had as many issues with the Middle East since we haven't relied on them either. So there's a lot of like global perspective. Mm. There are a lot of benefits besides just the ones that are easy to mm-hmm. recognize.
And the geopolitical and mm-hmm. international trade and dependence. Very cool. All right, the fourth area, again, this is probably one most people would be familiar with, is automation. Kind of generic, but in this particular case, we're thinking about industrial robots, service robots, which I know Kim really loves, and automation systems. So industrial robots, this would fall in the camp of manufacturing. So assembly lines where you've got a robot that's doing a very complicated, let's say, manufacturing activity that traditionally may have been more people. So it's doing it faster, cheaper, and 24/7. There is no punching out for a break. The automated robots and the manufacturing can work, consistently.
And now more than ever is that tipping point where we move to more robots just because, robots won't spread coronavirus.
As far as we know.
I mean, thinking about the food industry especially, and they're looking at using it not just in those lines, but even at restaurants and whatnot, that may be a more reliable way to go. And I always want to add when we're talking about automation, we have automated a lot over the past 4 years, the past 10 years, and we still have had economies running at full employment. I think that the argument that, the more robots we have, the less jobs we have is wrong. Mm-hmm. Because the more technology we have, the more things we get into, and then the more jobs that are made available. Mm-hmm. And, one of my favorite money managers says, humans weren't made to do those kinds of,
repetitive
tasks.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And if we have humans supervising and doing other jobs instead of those repetitive tasks, wages will probably go up because they're better jobs and improving quality of life.
Yeah. I think this is a common theme across all these different innovations, that they're meant to enhance human capital, not replace it. Mm-hmm. And we used to say that quite a bit in the world that that we worked on in technology, that's the case, is you're finding ways to make things easier so that you can redirect a lot of the human capital and the human focus on higher tasks.
Right.
Because there is a computer between our ears, which is pretty fast and probably smarter than these robots. Hopefully. The area of in automation, which I was kidding, but not kidding, on the service robots is logistics, vacuums, like your Roomba, is like your third child.
And my Brava.
And your Brava. I love the names. There must be a naming convention. It'd be good to be part of that mix of saying, okay, we got to name this automated vacuum system. When do you want to change it? Well, vacuum's a room. Let's call it Roomba, like dancing, like Zumba, Roomba.
Earlier I said, Noah, you're not done with your chores. And he says, I'm doing it right now. Roomba's vacuuming my room.
The robot's doing it. It's the best friend, the family's best friends. But there's other things like nurse assistants, delivery robots. If you've ever seen Amazon warehouses, if you ever see the warehouses where they've got these robots that are just like running around, picking up things from different crates and putting together orders, pretty exciting stuff, which then leads to automation systems, which is the third area. And in the automation system space, which is pretty exciting, is production lines and also restaurants. And so there was a story, Kim, that came out within the last couple of weeks, which was pretty exciting. And that is that White Castle was actually experimenting, and they introduced Flippy. And Flippy is a kitchen robot, which was brought about that they were testing that can actually grill the burgers for White Castle. And so what it does is they actually had a video of this robot that goes and flips the White Castle burger over. And of course, this reduces human contact, especially during COVID-19. And so the big news about it is, hey, maybe the person behind the counter that's actually cooking your burger is a robot.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the robot doesn't need to sleep at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. when I see a lot of people going to White Castle.
Yeah, you get the White Castle fix around 3 or 4 in the morning. No worries, because you can probably drive your driverless car or to the counter. You order through a robot or through your app-based application, and then a robot's cooking your burger and delivering it. So, and then you're paying through some cashless system. So you can,
You're paying on your app.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just paying through Venmo or something, or the app, exactly. So that's the other areas. The fourth area is automation. Like I said, these things are happening already. We've got robots here at home. We've got Flippy at White Castle. So there's so many more exciting things. Okay, the last one that I'll introduce, which is very exciting too, another area that you might be very familiar with, is 3D printing. So most of us, if you've ever seen a 3D printer, of course, we're looking at something that's more like home or for office use, and maybe it prints something really cool like a ring or something. But when you really expand 3D printing, some of the more exciting areas in large manufacturing and things that would have been very expensive to produce or would have taken a long time.
And it's really interesting because 3D printing, I think the investors got excited about it several years back, and we were looking at 3D printing stocks and whatnot, and then they kind of fizzled out, and nobody really was talking about them. Nobody was getting excited. Nobody wanted to invest in them. But along the way, these 3D printers have gotten really good. And, critical mass, wow, it's pretty amazing that a kid in high school figured out a way to print mass for local organizations that needed more mass during COVID. We have seen so much 3D printing of PPE equipment in this time of need, again, going back to necessity being the mother of invention, that there's amazing application going forward is the scalability.
Yeah. Team, we went to an event, and they had a couple 3D printers, and they might have printed like a ring or something real simplistic, and it was just kind of neat to see enough. And that was probably because we were there and they could do it quickly. But in 2015, General Electric produced the first 3D printed fuel nozzle that was combining 20 parts into one. So 2015, 5 years ago, first 3D printed fuel nozzle, 20 parts into one. In 2019, so 4 years later, the GE 9X engine contained 304 3D printed parts. So if you take that rate of adoption and, adjusting for the loss of, let's say, of some complexity, they anticipate that by the year 2024, so fast forward 4 more years or 9 years after that first fuel nozzle, could be upwards of 4,000 parts in one aircraft engine that are printed through a 3D printer. So, the number and the speed, this is what we're talking about. It's just amazing. And this is a complex piece of manufacturing that you're now, putting the responsibility on a 3D printer.
So we were watching on TV the launch of the first spacecraft that was non-NASA. Right?
Yeah,
the SpaceX. Mm-hmm. And so that brings up another topic here where the rockets that they're creating are also using parts that are 3D printed. And so, again, this is amazing. We could get more men on Mars or women on in space because to create a rocket, which I always think, wow, it's so expensive to build it, and then it comes down and usually you can't use it again. But in traditional manufacturing, there's 100,000 parts, over 100,000 parts. And it takes 2 years to build that rocket. And with a 3D printed rocket manufacturing line, it's less than 1,000 parts.
Wow.
And yeah, and 2 months building time.
So it's like 1/100th. No, that's higher, right?
Yeah, whatever it is,
Wow.
it's meaningful. And so, I bring this back to real life, and something that's near and dear to me is like if I go to the dentist, and I know my dentist has talked to me about 3D printing, a crown or something. If they can do that a lot quicker and at a cheaper rate, this helps us all. I don't have to sit in 2 appointments there. I only have one. That means I only have to be gone from work for 1 hour instead of maybe like 3 hours. And hey, that saves me a lot of time and makes me more productive. So again, when we go down to the business cycle and why we have to be optimistic and why we think, we're going to have a slow GDP because there's nothing left to do. We've grown, we've come to the last frontier, and that's just so wrong, right? There are technologies that are in the early frontier range, and they are going to speed up our GDP in the future.
Wow. So a lot of exciting developments. We've covered the first 5, and when we come back from a short break, Kim will take us through the remaining 5, and then we'll have a few final comments. So, exciting stuff.
I never watched the Jetsons growing up, but
What?
I hear they had self-driving cars.
Oh, you would have loved it. I mean, the Jetsons pretty much, all the things on this list, the Jetsons were thinking, because they had the robot who cleaned the house and cooked the meals and took care of the kids.
Wow.
They had the flying cars.
I know.
I'm sure they had so many more innovations. It was actually pretty revolutionary for its time, yeah?
Yeah, so really exciting autonomous cars. And you think that's something of the future, but we had the first delivery truck go across the country last year and deliver butter.
And that's what they delivered, was butter?
They delivered butter.
Oh.
Yeah. So I tell you that because you can Google search it and you'll find this ride. They do most of this driving at night. So that takes away the traffic in the middle of the day when all of us need to use the roads. If they could be doing that at night, wow, that's so helpful.
It's not a driver that gets tired.
No,
right?
It's not.
Can be at 3 or 4 in the morning when the roads are clear and just barrel through, from one point of the country to the next. So you think about the expanded commercial opportunities in delivering products like, truckloads of things, but, you can also see that happening, let's say, with large boats like container ships that could do the same, or even aircraft. If they're so daring, to move to operations like that can actually,
But and you say, you say it sounds scary to lead to aircraft, but that's the next level. So if you think that, right now we picture autonomous cars, we picture Uber and Lyft and things like that, where we have an app and we're going to have a car just pick us up and take us from point A to point B. And by the way, it's when they do the estimates on pricing of this, it's going to be a lot cheaper than the ride-hailing systems of today, where we actually have drivers. So there's a lot of applicability. But even after we get through that first wave of autonomous driving cars, then we can talk about, the autonomous driving helicopters. And that's what they're saying. They're going to be like helicopter taxis, helicopter drones to transport goods, to transport people. An ambulance, they were looking at one example of an ambulance costing in today's day probably about $1,000 and to transport somebody to a hospital. And, if you have a heart attack and there's traffic, you don't get there in time, you may not make it. But then when they fast forward to looking at these helicopters that are, can drive on their own or fly on their own, that they can get the cost down to, they estimate about $150. So now not only is it cheaper, but, they can fly over the traffic and get you there in a faster amount of time.
Yeah, you kind of combine the 6, which is the autonomous ride-hailing, and the 7, which was looking at these aerial drones for both hospital services, could be for delivery, air taxis, and delivery of packages.
Right, and so they're using it in drone delivery. You want to think back to the combination of all of these things, because all of this technology that we're talking about runs into each other, because we're going to need autonomous, deep learning, we're going to need in there, we're automating processes, and we're doing this with driverless vehicles and whatnot. And so there's a lot going on there.
Right.
And, the amount of money that will be spent in these areas, it's big numbers.
Yeah, spent and saved.
Yeah,
It's both.
so this year we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary, 2020, right? We've been independent, working with Cambridge for 10 years now. And I'm looking at the forecast of where we'll be in 2030. We'll have to have another one of these discussions. So I'm looking at 2030 when we're celebrating our 20-year anniversary and saying, wow, 10 years ago we couldn't even imagine drone deliveries. And the amount of money that, they estimate $275 billion spent in delivery revenues in 2030.
Yeah.
And $39 billion for the hardware and $12 billion in mapping.
Whew.
And I think we are using some of this technology now. I have a friend that works at the water district, and he was telling me they used to rent these helicopters to fly over areas and take video footage so that they could survey the land. And anytime you rent a helicopter, it's a lot of money. Now they're doing it by drones.
Wow.
And it's so much cheaper.
Yeah. And as you pointed out, these things are happening already in that particular case. At the tail end of August, this made headlines, and that was that Amazon won FAA approval for prime air drone delivery fleets. And so even though they're not quite ready, they're gonna start beta testing it. And and this wasn't the first. UPS and also Alphabet-owned Wing had previously won the FAA approval for their drone delivery operation. So you can envision a future whereby you can order a product on Amazon, or and then that very same day it gets delivered, provided it's not a refrigerator or something super heavy. But you can imagine what that would mean for the lack of traffic, because if it gets delivered by drone on the very same day, then you don't have to worry about a truck out there, clogging up traffic or other delivery vehicles. And of course, those would be electronic vehicles, but they wouldn't be clogging the roads.
Right, and so that means we have less traffic, easier time getting from one place to another, and hopefully save even more lives.
Right. But I want to bring back to one of the things that you said, is that a lot of these technologies that we're introducing or talking about here there's a convergence, which is to say that they exist because other things exist. And so there is this symbiotic relationship between them that says you can't have drones and air drones if you don't have automation, if you don't have AI, these other areas that we already talked about. Exciting.
Right.
So what's next? This next area is really exciting. And I know you like to talk about it. We're going to introduce it, and hopefully in the future we'll expand on it. But go ahead. I'll let you.
So this has to do with more on the healthcare side, and we are seeing more and more development here. I am not a health expert. That's my disclaimer. So I may get some of the wording wrong or stumble on some of the things I'm saying, because it's all very complicated information. So excuse me for that up front. But what I will say is, when we look at the human genome and how we have decoded that, and you think that I remember sitting at my desk in 1998, 99, thinking about genome, the development of the human genome and whatnot, and it costing probably over $1 billion to create and develop. And now basically we can send in our spit to a DNA company for $99. And I hear some are even at $69 and get our whole DNA coming back to us. And now you can take that DNA and give it to some app and they can tell you what's the best way to diet. So it's absolutely unbelievable how, and I think this has to do a lot with supercomputers as well, is having the technology there to be able to, decode the DNA.
Yeah.
And do the whole gene sequencing.
Right.
And what that is helping us right now, I just read an article this morning that it was a supercomputer that is analyzing all the data coming in from COVID, and where they originally thought that COVID attacked your respiratory system because people were getting pneumonia and lung problems and having a hard time breathing, that they now believe it's more of a circulatory issue because it's impacting high blood pressure, it's impacting your heart, it's going to attack those vital organs. And so, in reading this article, it sounded like, well, they already have treatments out there, therapies that will work on circulatory systems. They're already FDA approved, and this is allowing them to move forward in this vital area.
There will be no doubt breakthroughs in science and in medicine as a result of this. And what we're really talking about is, as Kim pointed out, is this next generation DNA sequencing. And that is, according to some of the things we're reading and such, will become a standard in the care of oncology. So it's going to introduce science into healthcare decision-making, really exciting, enabling, this is really exciting, personalized medicine and accelerate drug discovery. So as you pointed out, if you know the makeup of your individual genome, that it might actually detect a specific disease you could be, at risk for getting. And when it comes to treatment, that it might have a better understanding of how to treat, if you have an ailment of some sort.
And this is the area, every year when we give back to community and to organizations we feel are worthy at the end of the year, I have been a big big fan of gene therapy, and especially in how they're treating cancer. And so, you hear a lot about using new gene therapy treatments as opposed to the old way, which was, just traditional chemotherapy or radiation, which attacks all cells. The gene therapy is very concentrated, getting to the genes that are mutating and fixing them instead of killing everything around it. And I think that is just so great.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, we're not doctors, obviously. But the part that is really exciting is that whole idea of liquid biopsies, that are sequencing these tumor-derived DNA fragments, things that are circulating in your bloodstream, and that they're able to use this information and match the patient to specific therapies without the need of this invasive biopsies that are taking place. So I just said a whole bunch of stuff that I probably didn't even understand what I was saying. But in just understanding, this is, when we talk about game changers in the area of healthcare, is huge.
Right, and I think that's where, everybody talks about diversity for the sake of diversity, but it was, when I go back to this story today about COVID and the circulatory system, they said it was the second biggest computer in the world that solved this problem. And so, I go back and look at, I remember when COVID first started here in the U.S. and Microsoft was pouring a lot of money, and Apple and all these big think tanks are spending money. They're the ones that impress me the most because those are the people that understand big data. And if they are getting involved in this and we're using supercomputers, we are getting technology involved in a traditional healthcare world. We're cross-pollinizing, and bigger and better ideas are going to come out of that.
Which I think brings us to the ninth area, which we've talked about, the convergence, which in this case is the biotech research and development efficiency that comes when you convert, you have the convergence of artificial intelligence, this next generation DNA sequencing, and then of course gene editing. So
gene editing, I have listened to 2 podcasts on it, And I was like, what's this? And I still don't completely get it, but I do understand it. It's a little bit of a cut and paste job. You when you edit things on Microsoft Word or Google Docs, and you cut something and you paste it somewhere else. I mean, that really is gene editing in my simplified world of understanding this stuff. But what's really interesting is, we have people that are going into that are something is bothering them. They're feeling sick. And, the first thing the doctor says, well, is it COVID? Because it infects so many different areas of your health. They don't know. But they will not be able to treat you or take you into a hospital to get all the other tests that you need until they test you that you are COVID negative. And of course, that's a problem when we're talking about time. And sometimes, if you have cancer and it's fast growing, you lose a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before you can get treated. It's a big problem. So imagine if you were able to, on the diagnostic side, have one test and using all this gene editing, be able to test for multiple things at once.
Oof. And we're not talking about something that's small. And sizing the opportunity, some of the projections, and what this could translate to as far as the improvements in R&D efficiency could add $9 trillion to the market capitalization of therapeutic companies during the next 5 years. That's with a T.
And that's just an industry. What is funny is we look at technology, and in the past we thought, let's lump sum all technology in one industry. Mm-hmm. But now we've got semiconductors, we've got, internet, you've got cybersecurity. You can break down technology, mm-hmm. hardware, software, into multiple different sectors. Mm-hmm. And we're just in the beginning with biotechnology and healthcare, whereas they were just healthcare and biotechnology before. But we're going to have so many sectors inside there, dividing up all the different tasks that they can do. And that is going to create so many jobs. Mm-hmm. So forget it. If we lose it in automation somewhere else, we're going to recover it in a different area.
Absolutely. And so, again, this is definitely an area, game-changing technology, game-changing innovations that are taking place. We could spend a whole podcast just talking about this, but we won't. We'll just round off, the 10 big ideas for 2020 and beyond. And the final one, Kim?
So the last one is digital payments. And so I admit I don't have a Venmo account yet. I know if somebody wants me to Venmo them, I say, okay, Victor, Venmo that person.
Yeah, I got one.
But I do have a Zelly account, and I use it for my business. Mm-hmm. And because, I've gotten to the point where, yes, I don't like checks. And I have been, we're putting together this book on all the change that's happened in the past 10 years for our 10-year anniversary. And I was just doing a little research project to see how many checks have been written last year in comparison to 2010 or 2015. And I don't have the accurate comparison yet because there's so many different ways to look at it. But needless to say, we have reduced the amount of checks in the system altogether by, millions. And it's a lot because of digital payments, right? So we're finding other ways to send money to people that are much faster.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I wrote a check.
And then there's Bitcoin. Everybody loves to talk about Bitcoin, and that is a really complex thing because now it's not just digital payments, but it's also security. Mm-hmm. And being able to, encrypt something to, a level that is like crazy. Encrypted to the 10th degree or to the 50th degree, because all of the tests that you have to go through in order to claim your account with Bitcoin is, it sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, it does.
But people are transferring money from one country to another. It's helping people that are, first generation migrant workers who may send money back home. This is facilitating that, and especially when you're talking across seas to Africa or to Asia or wherever it may be.
Mm-hmm. Well, undoubtedly, the other thing too, and you look at a generations how they spend money. You're seeing more and more people who have access to Venmo may not have a traditional bank account, and the transfer of money and the speed of market when it comes to the transfer of money, that things are happening now, and you see it. There's that social component where if a group of friends go out to eat and one person foots the bill, that everybody's Venmoing their portion of the bill before the end of the evening, and it's all electronic exchange. It's not cash; it's cashless.
Right,
So it's completely from one account to the next.
And the traditional banks are realizing that things are shifting beyond their control, and so they are buying up a lot of this technology.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, we use Chase, and I do use Zelly. I don't know if it's Zelly or Zelle. But that must have been a technology. I'm not sure how they got it, but it's very similar to Venmo and how you can just email somebody a payment.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's democratizing,
Yeah,
right?
and
The world.
And retailers and people who provide services have to expand their ways of receiving funds.
Mm-hmm.
So we had somebody who did some work for us, and when it came to form a payment, they said, well, you can either write a check, but we prefer if you do Venmo, because they know that that's immediate and
Right.
secured, that they're going to receive it. So that's what we did with the photographer.
Yeah, and you can see, home loans used to be all done going into a lender. Now a lot of people are doing some home loans online.
Mm-hmm.
What else is being done? In our world, if we just say financial software and fintech in general, is helping us get better at our job in terms of the amount of data we can hold for our clients and be able to help them make better decisions. I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah. So those, my friends, are the big ideas for 2020 and beyond. And we were just really scratching the surface on a couple of areas. But this is part of the reason why we're so excited. I mean, excited to have the podcast back to talk about these things. Excited to share some of the developments that are taking place despite the fact that people are working from home. And it'd be easy to think that things aren't happening, but they are. They're happening, and they're happening. They're becoming part of our everyday life.
That's right. So we just want you to know, when you think about all this, there's so much to be excited about, and there's so much opportunity. We always think the market has come back to a great degree. We're seeing higher highs again, and people are wondering, this has to come to an end. But with innovation, there's always opportunity for new growth. And so people sometimes say I'm an eternal optimist. But I'm optimistic because I know that there are great minds out there innovating and challenging the status quo.
Absolutely. And so speaking of great minds, is a great segue, Kim, to share with everybody that is part of the fourth season of the Tech Girl Financial Podcast that is centered around the concept of innovation. In our next podcast, not to give it away, but we do have a special guest. Our special guest is Azra Nadeem, who is the first female Pakistani venture capitalist who's a global speaker, and she's going to come talk about artificial intelligence and deep tech and some of the technology that they are working on to help the storytelling narrative. So that'll be an exciting podcast that'll be coming up next. We hope you'll tune in. But any final words before we wrap it up?
Just to stay positive. Good things are coming.
Yeah, good things are coming, and we want to thank you all for participating. We know this probably went a little longer than most of our podcasts, but we had so many things to talk about, and we're so excited about this space. If you're interested in learning more, or if you have a special guest in mind in the subject of innovation, we are looking for guests to be part of the podcast. You can reach out to me directly at victor@techgirlfinancial.com. And we also invite you, obviously, to connect with us on any one of our social media channels. So if you are interested, let us know. We'd love to have you on the show. All right. So thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
If you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future shows, please send an email to victor@techgirlfinancial.com or join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag AskTGF. We also encourage you to follow us on the Tech Girl Financial page on Facebook and connect with us on LinkedIn.
Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member FINRA, SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Tech Girl Financial and Cambridge Investment Research, Inc. are not affiliated companies. Discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions.